13th. I don't know. Yeah. September 13th. There you go. Good to see you. I'm right here in Las Vegas, my home. When I'm in United States, I would call Las Vegas my home. As it turns out, I've got to spend some time in the States. I actually might be here the next 6 months, believe it or not. So, partially, kind of on and off, maybe the next 6 months. I got to go down to Phoenix next week and back to my old stomping ground down there. But yeah, here in Vegas, I went hiking at Red Rock Mountains this morning up to Turtlehead Peak. That's where I always used to go hiking, and just enjoying it. It's a little nice to get out of the humidity. St. Bart's was fantastic, but it was definitely humid. And then Puerto Rico was super, super humid. In Puerto Rico, the lockdowns were even more draconian than they are here in Las Vegas. So it's nice to walk around the casino and hang out with family and friends and whatnot. And I had dinner last night with Mr. Robert Barnes, who is the extraordinary free speech constitutional lawyer that I've had on my channel many times. He and I went to grab a steak dinner, and we sat there for probably 3 or 4 hours and just talked about the Fed, free speech, social unrest, all the stuff that we talk about on the channel. You'd think that guys like Robert and I, when we go to dinner, we talk about something different, but we don't. We talk about the exact same stuff that we talk about on this channel, that's for sure. Okay, and guys, definitely go check out Rebel Capitalist Pro. That's the online research or investment forum that I have with Chris McIntosh and Lynn Alden. They're absolutely fantastic. We do live streams. We have their research. We have a forum for members. It's absolutely amazing. You guys got to check it out. It's and Gene, my digital marketing guy, is doing a $1 a week trial. So it's a fantastic promotion. It's at georgegammon.com/pro. And also, if you haven't seen the interview I uploaded Friday night, where I interviewed Lynn Alden and Jeff Snyder at the same time, you have to check that out. That was when I was doing it, and even when I tweeted it out, I said this is probably the best piece of content I've ever created. And that was not clickbait. If you look at the comments and the responses, and everyone is saying the exact same thing. So that is an absolute must-watch video that was uploaded this last Friday night. So now that is out of the way, let's get into your questions. And by the way, it was a late time today because I'm on the West Coast and doing it at 9 o'clock in the morning. And I wanted to hang out with family and friends last night. I was out really probably till midnight, just at that dinner place talking with Robert. So that's why we have a little bit of a late start. So anyway, let's get into the questions. And guys, if you do have a question, make sure you start with the word question so I can see it right away. And although you guys taught me that hack last week, I forgot how to do that. It was like a command something, and then I type in question and they'd all pop up. If you guys remember how to do that, put it in the chat. That was a really cool hack, and I forgot how to do it. Okay, Arthur's here. It's good to see you, Arthur. You guys are chatting back and forth. I'll see you in the Rebel Capitalist Pro live stream here in a couple hours. Okay, boy, tons of people going back and forth. That's great. You guys are really active in the chat today. Okay, here's a question. If interest rates are super low, aren't good companies more valuable? If rates go up, the debt they have can be bought back for pennies on the dollar. Nah. Okay. If rates go down, they get paid to take on. Wait a minute here. I'm not sure that you're. Let's see. Am I not understanding this? If rates go up, the debt they have now can be bought back. Bought back by whom, though? They would have to roll over the debt and pay the higher interest rates. So I'm not sure how you're seeing that. It's almost like you're thinking they can buy their own debt back at some sort of cheaper price. Huh. Okay. If rates go down, then they get paid to take on debt. If rates go down, you're talking about like negative? Well, Well, let me just focus on the part of the question I'm following here. If interest rates are super low, aren't good companies more valuable? Yeah, technically, but if interest rates go back up, they're at 5,000-year lows. So, I mean, you could justify that, but I mean, again, you got to look at it like a McDonald's, right? If you're in there buying a McDonald's and they're asking $1 million, you're not going to say, well, I'll pay you the $1 million. You can justify it because interest rates are super low. I like that. That may be something you'd address, but you'd get to it like way down the road. That wouldn't be the first thing that would come to your mind. You'd say, let me look at the P&L. Let me look at how much profit the business is making. That's what you look at. You say, okay, what are your payroll? What's your top line? What are your cost of goods sold? What are your fixed costs? What are your marketing costs? What's the franchise fee? That's what you'd look at first. And then once you got to it, you'd say, okay, then if I got to borrow money to buy this McDonald's, then what's my interest rate? What's my whatever you call it, debt reduction, carry cost. And then you'd say, okay, well, then can I afford it? And then you'd do just basic ROI. Let's say you got to take 300,000 out of pocket. And then your debt reduction is, let's just say 100 grand a year. And the McDonald's is bringing in 200. Okay, well, now you got 100 grand in profit for 300 out of pocket. And you ask yourself, is a 33% return or whatever that factors out to be, if that's worth your time and energy to manage the McDonald's, and not that you'd have to manage it, but you got to hire a manager. It obviously isn't a passive investment. So then those are the lines of questions. The question isn't, oh my gosh, this McDonald's is super cheap because interest rates are so low. And then if you value the profits of the McDonald's based on interest rates, well, then I'd pay $2 million from McDonald's. Like, no one says that. In fact, my 12 plus years of being an entrepreneur and buying and selling businesses and starting from scratch and whatnot, the interest rates never crossed my mind. Never. Like, if you had to take on debt, then once you got to that point, you'd be like, okay, what's the rate? Okay, so what's what would my monthly payments be on the debt? And then how much profit am I bringing? It was just way down the list of priorities. So, if it's down the list of priorities when you're looking at a McDonald's, why isn't it way down the list of priorities when you're looking at Apple stock or Tesla or something like that? And I get it. I get the valuations. They do the cash flow, the discount, future cash flows, and all that stuff. But I don't know. Maybe that's the way you're supposed to do it, but that's not the way I do it, because that's never the way I looked at a business. And if I buy a stock, the only reason I buy it is because I'm buying the whole. I'm thinking about it like I'm buying the entire business, not that I'm just buying some piece of paper. So that's how I'd look at it. Arthur, I think you slammed a Red Bull or something like that, buddy, before you came on today. You've got your every single comment here. My goodness, I don't see how you even typed that fast. How it went down to the bottom here. Okay, so Andy is saying, if you were in medical school, would you take out student loans and use your available cash to buy gold, silver, Bitcoin, or use available cash to pay tuition? Nah, you got to pay your tuition, man. I don't, unless you can get the, no, I wouldn't do that. I mean, I take out loans. I might do it to buy real estate though, because you could get those loans forgiven potentially, and you're getting it at such low interest rates, especially if you can fix it. I don't know if you can fix student debt or not. If you could, I'd think about it, but I wouldn't use it to buy gold and Bitcoin, because not that I don't like gold and Bitcoin, it's that you're borrowing money that you're going to have to pay back in the future. Therefore, you need an income stream to pay the debt. And if you've got gold, okay, that's great. But if it doesn't go up, let's say, then you've got that monthly payment, but you have no income coming in to make the monthly payment. Or if you bought a rental property, like if you house hacked and bought like a triplex, then you'd have positive cash flow coming in that would be, or cash flow period that would go to pay off your mortgage or off the loan that you used to buy the property in the first place. So I would consider it with real estate, but I would not consider it with gold, Bitcoin, or silver, because they just don't pay you to own them. Okay, question. Were you surprised by Snyder's reply on blockchain could be used as the next evolutionary step in global finance? Does that inspire you to have more discussions on the topic? Yeah, I mean, I was surprised to a certain extent, though. I mean, if you talk to Eric Townsend, my good buddy with Macro Voices, I mean, he does a lot of thinking about this. And I think that's kind of the direction. He sees something like blockchain. I don't know if he sees blockchain specifically, but obviously Snyder's a really smart guy. Would I dive deeper into it? Maybe. I think there's other things that I'd like to talk about. And I haven't done any whiteboard videos the last week, and I'm not going to do any this week because I'm just traveling and I've got to go to Phoenix. And when I'm traveling in hotel rooms, I can't really do whiteboard videos. I don't even have a whiteboard with me. I can't really do it until I settle down in one spot for at least 2 or 3 weeks. And then I can go out to Office Depot and buy a kind of a makeshift whiteboard. And I've got all my camera stuff right here. But anyway, so just FYI, guys, I'm not going to have a new whiteboard video until next week when I get settled down. And then I'll start cranking them out at least 2 to 3 per week again. Okay, question. What would you do if you woke up tomorrow and all your real estate had been liquidated to USD and sitting at Wells Fargo? What would I do? Well, I'd buy T-bills with it right away. I might leave maybe 100 in there. Maybe a little more. I mean, I don't know. If it got close to 250, I'd be a little concerned. But especially at 250, I'd take the excess and just buy T-bills, just 3 months, something like that, until I figured out what to do with it. Right now, I mean, the only stuff that's cheap that I see is Russia, and that's just by talking to Lynn and to Chris McIntosh. Let's see. I'd really look to Dubai for real estate. Also, I'd go. See, if I liquidated the real estate, I'd probably go right back to Medellin and buy more real estate, because now there's some super cheap deals from people who had to liquidate. The market really hasn't gone down that much, but you can find some good deals from sellers who are super motivated. So I'd probably sell the real estate and go right back into real estate. But just get different deals, and probably not in the United States, but maybe Dubai, Medellin. But in the interim, until I could find a good deal, I'd just throw it into T-bills and roll it. And then I'd buy gold with it too. I'd take 10% and buy gold. I always like to do that. Okay, question. Could the collapse of the dollar combined with food shortages cause the disintegration of the U.S. government and mass death, starvation, violence? The collapse of the dollar, food shortages. So I don't know that the collapse of the dollar. Let me think this through. The collapse of the dollar. Yeah, I'm seeing if there's a causal effect there. I mean, honestly, I think what's going to bring on food shortages is just all these just insane rules that we're getting that are geared towards climate change. So in New Zealand, as an example, they're just coming out with some of the most draconian, what I think is just crazy laws and regulations about when you can plant seeds, and you can't plant crops on an incline more than 5% or whatever. Chris was telling me that he's got a huge property in New Zealand. He's got horses and I believe cattle and a bunch of animals. And he was reading the law, and you can't have like over 5-inch hoof prints. You can't have your land I guess, wet enough or something, or you have a deep footprint. I said, Chris, how on earth are they going to, how can they make that a law when there's just no way to monitor that? He's like, what they're doing is they're starting to go around with drones and take drones over everyone's farm and take like super close-up pictures of everything. And then they just send you the ticket in the mail, basically. It's just like, remember, last time I lived in Phoenix way back in like 2008, 2009, I remember right on 51, there was a little, one of those cameras that would check your speed. And if you were speeding, they'd flash it and then they just send you the ticket in the mail. And I guess it's the same thing now in New Zealand. If you're caught like planting a crop in the wrong time or on a hill or something like that, or you've got a deep hoof print in your property, the drone will pick it up and just mail you the ticket. And so, obviously Chris wants nothing to do with that. So he's getting ready to pack up and pull the ripcord on New Zealand. But my point is, I think that's what would lead to food shortages, because the more restrictions you put on farmers, the less food they're going to grow. And if we have an increasing population, if we have an increasing global population with less and less food, I understand there's technological advances there, but at a certain point, regardless of the technological advance, you've still got to grow the stuff. And if you're growing less of it, then that could lead to the food shortage. I'm not sure. I mean, if you had like a Venezuela type collapse of the dollar, yeah, then you might look at that. But if you're talking about the DXY going from 100 to 50, then I don't know that there'd be much of a causal effect there. But again, it depends on how crazy the government got with their regulations around what you can't grow and the restrictions they put on farmers. Okay, question. Are we grabbing drinks in Scottsdale? Well, maybe. I don't know. Maybe I'll do a meetup in Phoenix. I'm not sure what the regulation is. I was thinking about doing a meetup here in Vegas, but everything's so, I mean, you got to wear a mask everywhere, and it's just, I don't know. I mean, it's looser, it's more flexible than California, but it's still, I don't know if we could pull it off. We don't have to wait a month or two and see how things play out. I'll have to look at the regulations in Arizona when I get there and tell you. I like to live if I get a place in Arizona, which I probably will, just for a couple months or whatever. I usually like to live around the Biltmore. So yeah, I make it out to Scottsdale every once in a while. Okay, George, you did a video recently asking whether there is sovereign debt jubilee underway and got an answer that there is no jubilee on the horizon. Could you explain why that's not an option? Well, I'm not sure what video you're referring to specifically, Gary, but I spoke to Schiff about this the other day. I actually spoke to Schiff on the phone when I was in Puerto Rico. So big shout out to Peter. He helped me out with a couple things I was dealing with out there. So that was really nice of him. And then I talked to his marketing guy, his social media guy, and helped him do some stuff on their YouTube channel. So hopefully I can assist Peter in growing his channel and getting some more views there. I gave him some of my best tips. But anyway, when I was talking to Peter, not on the phone, but when the last time I interviewed him, he brought up a fantastic point. He's like, listen, if they do a debt jubilee, how are they going to raise interest rates? So, I mean, or how are they going to reduce base money? Maybe that's a better way of saying it. Because I guess with IOER, they could I'd have to think that through. But with IOER, which is interest on excess reserves, they could increase the rate at which they pay. But then how do they decrease the size of the balance sheet? They really couldn't, because the only way they can decrease or increase the size of the Fed's balance sheet, base money, is by buying or selling assets. But if you don't own any assets, if the Fed owns all of the Treasury's debt, and so that's an asset on the Fed's balance sheet, it's a liability on the government's balance sheet, and they just click the delete button and both numbers go back to zero, then to Schiff's point, what do they sell to reduce the money supply, or at least base money? There's nothing. I don't know how they do it. So that's one reason they might not be able to do a debt jubilee. And I think that might be the reason why whenever you hear Raoul Pal with Real Vision, another guy I've got a ton of respect for, talk about Japan doing a potential debt jubilee, he always talks about the release valve being the yen. And that might be why. I'm not sure. I'd have to think that through, but I don't. Obviously, that wouldn't be good for the currency. But I'd need to think through the headwind there. Obviously, what we talked about with Schiff and doing the debt jubilee, they couldn't reduce base money, but there'd also be some other knock-on effects. But that's the main thing. The main thing that would prevent them from doing a debt jubilee is the potential loss of faith in the currency itself. And at the end of the day, that's all fiat currency is. It's just kind of blind faith in the system. All right, Travis says, welcome back to Vegas, George. Thank you, Travis. What category is your YouTube channel under? Educational or entertainment. Started my YouTube channel 3 weeks ago. Well, congratulations on starting a YouTube channel. That's fantastic. I'm not sure what category it's under, but what I can tell you is it doesn't matter. So don't really stress over it too much. I know that when you start the channel, you can use like little tags for it or something. Those don't matter. It's those used to matter back maybe 2010, 2011, but now the algorithm is so good on YouTube. It knows what your video is about. It listens to what you're talking about and translates or transcribes it. And so even if you don't do any tag at the beginning, you want to do keywords and tags and stuff like that. But once you get up to like maybe 50,000 subscribers, that matters a lot less, in my opinion. And it's not just my opinion. It's guys that I've talked to, such as Tim Schmoyer, who has a channel called Video Creators. He's one of just the OGs in YouTube. And I've actually had a couple conversations with him. And he kind of walked me through that. And it makes a lot of sense. That's why now, if you're using like vidIQ or something like that and checking out my videos to see the tags that I'm using and everything, often I don't use a lot of tags, not like I used to, because I just don't think it matters that much. It's really just to tell YouTube what the video is about. And I mean, if you've got a video on quantitative easing, as an example, and your YouTube channel is under the category of entertainment, like that's not going to detract from the algorithm juice that video is getting. It's all about the click-through rate. It's about your retention graph. It's about how long you're keeping someone on the platform. It doesn't really matter about what category your YouTube channel's in. Oh, Control F. Thanks, Sean. Okay. George, question, is the best piece of content, even though other videos of yours are packed with value, how would you sum up the Lynn and Jeff talk? What are your main Oh, yeah, that's what I said at the beginning. I think it's definitely one of the best interviews I've done, if not the best, at least in my opinion. When I was there, just having the conversation with him at the end, when we got done, I was like, that was amazing. I think everyone's going to get so much value. I got so much value out of the conversation just by hearing Lynn go back and forth with Jeff, and the whole discussion about quantitative easing and creating new money supply and the euro dollar market or system being broken. And I think that, there was a great question in there where I asked Jeff if it's possible for the economy to truly recover until the euro dollar system is either fixed or replaced. And he said that he didn't think it was possible for the economy to quote unquote recover in a healthy way without the euro dollar system being fixed or replaced. And that was really an aha moment for me. And next week, when I start doing whiteboard videos again, I can assure you that the first two that I do will be based on that discussion that I had with both of them. My current take on Bitcoin, it's just a great speculation. I don't think it's an investment. At least in my definition, it's not an investment because I don't get paid to own it. But I mean, I think there's a lot of asymmetry there. I'm not sure what the price is now. I think it went maybe from 12 to 10. I don't know if it's broken down below 10. But I think you just buy a little bit with the speculative side of your portfolio and just hang on to it. Don't think about the price. Don't even worry about it. I wouldn't even. I'd do my best not even to look at the price for 2 or 3 years, and just see how you do. But again, I like to allocate 10% of my portfolio to speculation, and out of that 10%, not a high percentage to Bitcoin. I wouldn't put a high percentage in anything because with those that speculative side, you're betting on so much asymmetry that there's maybe 30 or 40 might pan out, and you just got to have enough upside on those 30 or 40% that it'll take care of the losses on the other side of the portfolio. So, hi, George. With all the crazy things going on in the world, especially with the chaos in fiat currencies, wouldn't you up the insurance category, so physical gold, to 10% to 20? Maybe. I'm for me personally, I probably wouldn't, but I'm not saying that it's wrong for or right or wrong for other people. I mean, I definitely understand your point. That's for sure. But for me, I just like stuff that cash flows, and you always have to be honest with yourself on your strengths and weaknesses. And one of my strengths is real estate. I'm really, really, really good at real estate. I made a lot of money, and and you guys know that I don't say that unless I really mean it. I'm not some blowhard that just says he's awesome at everything and just arrogant or conceited. I think I'm pretty honest there, and I'll tell you if I'm terrible at something, but I'll also let you know if I think I'm pretty good. In real estate, I think I'm not only good, I think I'm an expert. With everything I've done going back to 2012 and investing all over the world, and the team that I have now in Medellin and whatnot. So my point is that I'm always a little more comfortable going and into more real estate with that extra 10% you're talking about in a market that I might feel is less volatile than the United States because it has less leverage. And but that's just me. I'm just kind of playing to my skill and just kind of staying in my lane. For other people, it might make a lot of sense. Maybe you're an expert on, maybe you're like Schiff and you're an expert on gold or the miners or something, then it might make sense. Maybe you're an expert on dividend paying stocks like Lynn. She always points out some great stocks in Russia that I've thought about buying. I mean, Luke Oil and what is it, Spurbank, that she talks about with these huge dividends. And if you're bullish and you look at Russia's balance sheet, man, it looks good. Russia's got a good balance sheet, and they're really not into this whole Marxist narrative that we're really going towards in the United States and the developed world. So I think there's a lot of opportunity out there for sure. And I know it's crazy with the fiat currencies in the West, in the developed world, but there's some other areas where the fiat currency might not be as bad, but there's also some potential upside opportunities. So that's kind of how I look at it. See, Gregory, George, can you explain where the created money comes from when I get a loan? Where did the bank get the money from? They created it out of thin air, Greg. So what happens is when you get a loan in as you know, there's no physical money in your account. There's, like I was saying on one of the videos I did the other day, a whiteboard video, that if your bank account was just like a box, like a safe deposit box or something like that, and you opened it up, there would be nothing in there, zero. Even if you go to the bank with $100,000 in cash and give them the cash, they're not keeping that cash. It doesn't sit in your account. And when you go to get your balance at your bank, your checking account, and it says $100,000, that doesn't mean that there's $100,000 in your account. That just means they owe you $100,000. That's an IOU. A bank deposit is a liability of the commercial bank. It's your asset, it's their liability, and it's an IOU. So so what happens when you get a loan? Let's say you go down to the local Wells Fargo and you want to get a loan for 100 grand, and all they do is they just go to your account and type in 100 grand, and all it is just an IOU for 100 grand. And there's no money, there's no physical notes, there's no gold. It's just like a calculator. It's just like an NBA scoreboard, that your account now just says there's an extra 100,000. They created the money, or I hate to say money, they created the purchasing power. They created an additional $100,000 of bank liabilities, of deposits, that now you can take and spend and trade for goods and services. And then the bank has that loan on their balance sheet as an asset, because you owe them that 100,000 plus interest. And now that's a liability on your balance sheet. And there's just an extra $100,000. I mean, if the banking system wanted to, they could create an extra quadrillion dollars tomorrow. If they could find that many people to lend to profitably, they would just create an extra quadrillion dollars in loans, and that's an extra quadrillion dollars in purchasing power, and that's an extra quadrillion dollars in bank deposits. Therefore, that's an extra quadrillion dollars in M2 money supply, chasing the same amount of goods and services, right? So that's how the banking system creates quote unquote money. I wouldn't call it money, but they increase the money supply, or the currency units that are chasing goods and services, just by increasing the amount of loans. Now, of course, when you pay that loan off, then the money supply decreases by that much money. So when you hear guys like Brent and Steve and Jeff talk about how they see things as deflationary moving forward, that's because they see on net balance the amount of loans being created in the real economy going negative. So sure, there's going to be car loans, sure, there's going to be housing loans, but people are going to be paying those loans off faster, or they're going to be creating much fewer loans in the future, and therefore it's going to be sucking liquidity or sucking money supply out of the system. Now, whether that's going to happen or not, who knows? But that's their argument. And to Jeff's point, if you look at what usually creates additional inflation, it's the private banking system really getting aggressive with their lending, and they're doing that because the economy they're seeing positive signs out there in the economy. They've got people that want to borrow money, and then you've got two parties. You got people wanting to borrow more and more and more, and then you've got other banks wanting to lend and lend and lend. And that's where you really start to get inflationary pressures. But if the banks don't want to lend, and if the people are tapped out, they don't have the income to take on more debt, they don't have the balance sheet capacity, then there's fewer loans being created. And then, of course, that's deflationary, because that's, like I said, that's decreasing the money supply. So that's why guys like Jeff and Brent and Steve always remind us, and they're right on the money, no pun intended, that when you look, if you want to look at deflation, inflation, or the money supply, it all comes from the commercial banking system. The Fed does not control the money supply. Nope. They control base money, but they don't control the broad money. And that's what we should be concerned with. It's that you have to look at the commercial banking system, the deposits or the liabilities, your deposits, their liabilities, those IOUs. That's what you have to get hyper focused on in the commercial banking system if you want to have an educated guess as to if the future is going to be inflationary or deflationary. Okay, let's see. George, love your videos. I'm in Vegas too. When do you think is the right time to buy in Vegas? Residential real estate, not commercial. And when will a good time to buy commercial? Well, commercial, I don't really like commercial, so I'm not the right guy to ask. Not that it's not a good investment. I'm just not very good at it. So I just stick with residential. So I wouldn't want to give you any advice on something that A, I don't have a lot of experience in, and B, I haven't done well with commercial. So I mean, it's just a numbers game. You got to look at the numbers. So it's not when I think is the right time to buy. It's when can you buy under the cost of construction and a 1% RV ratio. That's your time to buy. And I don't think you can do that now. So I really wouldn't be a buyer in Las Vegas. I would be a renter. I mean, when I go back to Phoenix, I don't know how long I'm going to be there, but I mean, I'm not going to buy a place. I'm going to rent a place because I can rent a $1 million place for $5,000 a month. So I mean, think about that. So that's a 0.5 RV ratio. So when the RV ratio starts going below 1, the more it goes below 1, the better the deal is for the renter. The closer it gets to 1 and then 1 and above, the better the deal is for the owner, for the landlord, right? I mean, if you could rent at like a 0.2%, you'd be, I mean, that's financially, you'd be saving a ton of money because the person's mortgage probably, or their rent isn't even going to cover their mortgage at a 0.2% RV ratio. So, I mean, think about that. You got $1 million property and you're only making $5,000 a month in rent. And you say, "Oh, George, only that's a lot." Well, no, it's not, because if you had 10 $100,000 properties at a 1% RV ratio, you'd be making $10,000 a month in rent. You see, so that delta between $10,000 and the $5,000 means that that's money in your back pocket if you're renting. That's money that you're saving. It's a better deal financially to rent the lower the RV ratio is. So anyway, I don't know how I've got off on that tangent. Oh, with the Vegas real estate. Yeah, so that's what you really want to look at. And then you want to look at the cost of construction, and you want to be in a good neighborhood here. There's some great neighborhoods in Vegas, and there's some really poor neighborhoods. Poor meaning not financially poor, but high crime and whatnot, areas that you wouldn't want to have a rental property. So I think you've got to look at that and not just ask yourself, when do I think the right time is to buy? I don't have a crystal ball. I just know that I know my numbers, and I just wait until I can get those numbers, and then I take action. Yeah, Brendan's asking, in addition to uranium, coal, gold, do I like commodities? Yeah, I like food commodities. I like farmland. They're a little harder to play, but pretty much anything that does well in a stagflationary environment, it's cheap right now. And I like copper as well. And I think it's going to go up, but again, only with 10% of my portfolio at a max. And I think there's a lot of stuff out there cheap. When you look outside the United States, it doesn't just have to be commodities. But that's a great place to start. Best stagflation hedge? Commodities. Yeah, gold, of course, gold, silver. We'll see how Bitcoin does, but commodities. Will the Fed increase their investment in the stock market? I think so. I think before the year's out, the Fed will be buying stocks. They're going to do whatever they need to do to prop up the market. The entire economy revolves around the stock market and asset prices. That's if asset prices go down, the economy is just going to completely implode. So they have to elevate. They have to keep housing. They have to keep. Now, can they is another question. And people say, "Oh, sure they can." Well, they didn't in Japan. Japan did all this. We've seen this movie before. Now, I'm not saying that the United States is exactly like Japan. There's a lot of differences. But I do know that Japan tried the quantitative easing. They tried the MMT. They tried a lot of this. And they tried buying stocks, ETFs, JGBs. And this market's still down substantially from the 1990 highs and in nominal terms. So just because they're out there buying doesn't necessarily mean that the markets, they're able to elevate the market. Now, Maybe the Fed is different. Maybe the U.S. is different. But I know that's going to be their objective. That's for sure. Question, give Lynn Jeff's segment. When do you think deflation turns into inflation, your time frame? Well, I still think that we're going to have slight stagflation. I understand Jeff's angle, and obviously Jeff is a lot smarter than I am. And but I agree with Lynn. I don't know that we have deflation in consumer prices. I don't think we have hyperinflation, but I think we just have kind of a gradual grind higher and higher and higher with those consumer prices, and they're just going to stagflate, lie, and tax, stagflate, tax, and lie, like my buddy Burek says. So I think that's kind of the way things are going to play out. But I don't see it just going from a 3% CPI to a 30% CPI. I don't see that in the cards. But we'll have to see after the election. I think there's some back and forth with MMT and UBI. If that, you've got to just weigh the odds with the facts that you have at your disposal. And right now, I think that's the most probable outcome. But if the facts change, then so is my opinion going to, it might change. I think that's, we need to be very nimble thinkers in this type of financial environment. It's not the 1980s anymore, where you can just buy a bond at 12% and just forget about it, and life is good. We live in dangerous times. That's for sure. It was, I think, that Krugman, always that stupid Krugman ad that comes in on all my videos. Then he say something like that. But that part, I definitely agree with Krugman. So you have to be very flexible. You have to be agile. You have to be very, just, I think nimble is probably the best word in your strategy. And you have to always be willing to accept the fact that you could be wrong. And humility, I think, is extremely important in this type. And you can't be dogmatic, and you can't be stubborn. And I know, as people like gold bulls and Bitcoin bulls and commodity bulls, it's easy to say gold's going up, it's going up, it's going up, it's going up. And I think that's true. I think probability, that's my base case. But we have to always be receptive to being wrong, or at least we have to be receptive and open to others' opinions. And I hate to get into this echo chamber of where all your buddies are gold bugs, as an example. And that's all the people that you talk to. So you're just, of course, it's got to go up. And I think that makes you take on additional risks that you see what I'm saying? Because if all your buddies are gold bulls, and that's all you talk about, and every single YouTube channel you listen to is all about gold going up, I think without getting any counterbalance, not that I don't agree with that, but without getting any counterbalance, you could take your portfolio from like 10% to 20% to 50%, because you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to miss out on all this, and my buddies are going to get rich, and I'm going to be left behind because I don't own 100% of my portfolio is in gold, and there's no chance it doesn't go up because the Fed's going to print all this money. And I think that you've got to have that counterbalance. It's why when you go into a court case, they don't just hear from the defendant. They don't just hear from the plaintiff, right? You got to hear both sides of the story. And I think that really makes your thinking that much more precise. And it gives you a much better idea of risk. And I think it just makes you a smarter person. And that's why I try to interview all these people that I might not agree with on the Rebel Capitalist show. That's why I interviewed Professor Professor Wolf, a Marxist. And it's not that I agree with him, but I really want to listen to him. And I'm thankful that he was willing to come on the show and explain his views to me and the audience to help me better understand how his worldview, and that helps me refine my thinking. So I just want to make sure that we're all doing that, even though I'm very bullish on gold, and I always buy 10% as insurance. But whether it's gold, uranium, copper, Bitcoin, stocks, bonds, whatever it is, I think we should always be challenging our own views and just reassessing them. Benjamin is asking, what are my thoughts on Islamic style banking? I don't know how that works, honestly, Benjamin. I don't know. Hopefully I'll figure that out when I go to Dubai. But I can't answer that question for you because I'm not sure how it works. Okay, Nicholas is asking, what do you think about USD stablecoin adoption? And do you see more companies accepting payments from unsafe jurisdictions in stablecoin instead of relying on counterparty? See Rio Tinto. I think any type of infrastructure for the dollar or a stable coin or a Fed coin or anything like that, it's going to be a gradual process. I don't see it happening overnight. I could be wrong, but I think it just takes time for it to play out. I think there's more parties involved that want to deviate from the current system, the current infrastructure that we have for payment processing. And it's really the world reserve currency isn't necessarily about the currency. It's about the infrastructure. And that's why it's so hard to change we can't just flip right over to the Chinese yuan or the British pound or the euro or anything like that, because not that we just couldn't switch from green pieces of paper to red pieces of paper. At the end of the day, who cares? It's the infrastructure of those payments and the debt and all that's involved. So that just doesn't change overnight. So I think we're going in that direction, but it's going to take a while. So how does the Fed manipulate interest rates? That's a good question. Depends on who you're asking. Technically, the textbook way is they go out and they buy short-term T-bills, and that increases the amount of reserves, the amount of bank reserves. And therefore, if there's more bank reserves that banks have to lend to one another overnight, it's just supply and demand. If there's more supply, then the price to borrow those bank reserves overnight, if Wells Fargo needed to borrow some bank reserves from JP Morgan, let's say, if there is more and more cash or more reserves available, then the price to borrow those reserves would go down. In other words, the interest rate would go down. If there's fewer and fewer reserves, then the price would go up. The interest rate would go up. So technically, back prior to quantitative easing, the Fed would just, or so they say, would just buy, if they wanted to increase if they wanted to decrease the interest rate, the Fed funds, they would just, they would buy short-term T-bills from the banks. That would increase the amount of bank reserves. And then if they wanted the rates to increase, they would go ahead and say, okay, we're going to take it up to 2%. And then they would just sell enough treasuries to take the bank reserves out of the system and increase those rates. Now, Jeff Snyder would say that that's not really what they did. That's what they say, that it's just lip service. Really, they would just kind of manipulate the market with psychology. And if they said the rates are going up to 2%, then the market would gradually go up there, just because the market thought the Fed controlled the short end of the yield curve, but in reality they didn't. So that's a whole, and that gets very complex. But Jeff's got a lot of charts to show that he's right. But if you read a textbook, it's going to outline it the way I described at the very beginning. And now with quantitative easing, of course, it's way different, because they put in so many bank reserves into the system that the rate would always be zero. They could never, ever raise the rate, because there's 3 trillion in excess reserves, 3+ trillion in excess reserves. So there would be no way. And see, they couldn't extract reserves, because then that's QT, and then that could increase the long end of the curve. And so they had to come up with a new system. So once they started doing QE, they came up with something called IOER, interest on excess reserves. So now, instead of micromanaging the base money or the amount of bank reserves like they used to Now they just say, okay, if we want interest rates to be 1%, we will pay you banks to keep your bank reserves with the Federal Reserve, and we'll pay you 1%. So, of course, the banks aren't going to lend the money. Well, they just lend against that, but they're not going to create additional loans using those bank reserves as a backstop uh, at any rate over or under 1%, excuse me, because they could just do nothing and get the 1% from the Federal Reserve. You see, so they're not going to lend those bank reserves to any other bank overnight because at a lower rate. Because why do that when you could just leave it at the Fed risk free and get 1%? So why lend it out at 70 basis points or whatever? So that's why they had to come up with IOER. Which is a completely new type of system, which gets really weird when you think about taking IOER negative and how that might work or not work. Especially when you get, even into, and then you could have the Fed funds at zero, and you could still have the short end of the curve go negative based on supply and demand, because those are more market forces. But I don't want to get off on a huge tangent here. That's basically how it works. And by the way, if that didn't make a lot of sense, I've got a ton of videos on that I've done like 5-6 months ago. So check those out. That's a good question, Daniel. Daniel asks, would I still recommend house hacking in the US due to the political and social climate? It really depends on the jurisdiction. I mean, I wouldn't do anything. In fact, I wouldn't even spend time in a city that was really driven by the left. And as you guys know, I'm not political. I'm definitely not a Republican. That's for sure. I don't like the right. I don't like the left. But we got to call a spade a spade. And the bottom line is, if you're Antifa or whatever, or anyone that wants to protest or riot or loot or do any of these things, you're going to favor cities that are run by the left, because you're not going to get in as much trouble. It's pretty straightforward. The police aren't going to give you a hard time. They're probably going to look the other way, not even going to show up. And even if you do get in trouble, the court system there is going to go easy on you. In fact, Robert and I talked about this last night. We talked about this in our last interview, that it doesn't really matter what the law is nowadays. It's just what the political atmosphere and the societal narrative is around whatever you did or did not do. So I just think that if you go to a place like Dallas, as an example, or San Antonio, or maybe Phoenix, especially some of the surrounding areas of Phoenix, like Sholo, Arizona. I mean, you go to some of those little towns like that, and I mean, I don't know that you're going to have a lot of. So you could, but I think your chances are a lot lower there, that you'd have to deal with some political or social issue. Michael, you're going to see it on TV and CNN and all this nonsense, but it's not going to be in your front door, or it's a lot less likely that it's going to be at your front door. So that said, if I was in the right jurisdiction, then I would still consider it, so long as the numbers worked out. As long as you're positive cash flow in that triplex where you're living in one unit, you're collecting rent on the other two, I would definitely consider it, but only in the right jurisdiction. I would not consider it in a place anywhere in California. There's no way. I would not consider it in Portland, Oregon. I would not consider it in Seattle. I would not consider it in Baltimore, Chicago, Washington, D.C. I mean, you guys know the areas. I would consider it in a place like Dallas, San Antonio, Phoenix. Where else? And some of these smaller towns throughout the United States that were very kind of right-leaning. And again, it's not that politically I'm on the right, or I'm conservative or whatever. It's just looking at it from a standpoint of reducing your risk of riots or social unrest there. Okay, could the U.S. ban travel for people who owe more than 50,000 in debt? Since the Fed owns the majority of mortgage-backed securities and the IRS bans travel for citizens who owe the government. Oh, you're talking about who owe taxes of more than 50% or $50,000, excuse me. I don't know that they ban travel. They could I could see them banning travel outside of the United States, but I don't know if domestically. I don't know that that would behoove them at all. But I could see them. And by the way, the exit tax for the United States is like at 2 million. It starts at 2 million in assets. And a lot of people say, "Oh, that's a lot, George, I don't have 2 million in assets." But you don't consider inflation. Like do the math. Let's say you've got a house right now that's worth $500,000 and you own it outright. Just do the math on a compound interest calculator as to how long it would take you to get to $2 million if inflation was running at 10% per year. Wouldn't take you that long, compounded. And then all of a sudden you haven't increased your purchasing power at all because your house has just gone up with the rate of inflation, just in nominal terms. But all of a sudden you don't like what's going on in the United States, and you're like, you know what? I'm out. I'm going to bounce. I'm going to hand in my passport, and I've got this St. Lucia passport set up, and I'm just going to go down to St. Bart's and I'm going to hand in my U.S. passport. Well, okay, have fun with that, because now all of a sudden you fall into that category of they're going to tax you as though you sold your asset, even if you didn't, and they're going to charge you the cap gains. So there's a lot of crazy stuff going on, but I think there's other things that I would worry about a little bit more than the U.S. banning travel on people who owe the IRS 50 grand. I would be more concerned about like the wealth tax, the state local wealth tax. I mean, California, if I was in California, I could not get out of there fast enough. So I think you got bigger fish to fry, but I think that's an interesting question. And I definitely would see them going that direction in the future. Okay, so this is going to be the last question, guys, or maybe I'll do one more here just so I can take a break before I go to the member live stream in the Rebel Capitalist Pro forum. What would you define the major difference between velocity and supply demand? Let's see, if supply is high, but there is no demand, velocity is zero. There's no demand, velocity is zero. There's no demand, velocity. Okay. If demand is high, but there is no supply, velocity is zero. Yeah, but I mean, you're taking it to extremes where, yeah, I mean, if the demand is high, meaning there's demand for goods and services, but there are no goods and services, then yeah, there's not going to be any velocity of money because there's nothing being purchased. But I don't see that happening. I don't think the probability of that is very high. If the supply is high, meaning there's a lot of goods and services, and the demand is low for those goods and services, and velocity is zero. Well, but there's no demand. I don't see there being no demand. Maybe if people stopped eating, people are always going to eat, need gas, need a roof over their head. It's never going to go to no demand. So I don't know that I'd worry about velocity being zero. I think I understand it can go down, but not sure that it goes to zero. Okay, so we'll go with another question here. Oh, shoot, it just skipped on me. Okay, we'll go with this one. James says, some say QE causes deflation and that the U.S. cannot create money. If the government spends trillions on stimulus and infrastructure programs, isn't money somehow added to the supply? I think so. I think so, as long as they're doing quantitative easing, because if they're not doing quantitative easing, then the government would just, they'd have to sell those bonds, but they'd be taking money out of the system just to spend it right back into the system. So the way I set it up in that video, that whiteboard video, I would strongly encourage you to think of things in that way. And what I did is I just got hyper focused on the deposits in the commercial banking system. So we've got to ask ourselves the question first and foremost: is the Treasury, is them spending money, or is them borrowing? Let's start there. They got to borrow the money first. If them borrowing, issuing bonds, is that reducing the size or the amount of deposits in the commercial banking system? And the answer would be yes, if the entities or individuals buying the debt at the auction is a human being, is an average Joe, or if it's a business, or if it's a pension fund or something like that. Then that entity has to trade their deposit for the Treasury. So that would be taking a deposit out of the commercial banking system, therefore shrinking the money supply. But the government takes the money, that deposit, and let's say sends out a stimulus check. So it takes the deposit out of the system, then it puts the deposit right back in the system. So on net balance, it's a wash. But if the first transaction didn't happen from the commercial banking system, if it happened from the Fed's balance sheet, because remember, the liabilities of the assets of the banking system, the bank reserves, and a lot of their cash that they have on their balance sheet is held at the Fed. Okay, so if the purchase was made by a financial institution, then that would reduce the amount of base money, but then the Fed replaces that base money by buying the Treasury, and then when the Treasury, the TGA spends the money, then it increases the bank, the deposits in the commercial banking system, just like the previous example. But the only difference is there wasn't an initial decrease in the commercial banking system. So therefore, on net, although even if the cash on the primary dealer balance sheet went down and it was replaced by bank reserves, the Fed's balance sheet stays the same, but the balance sheet of the commercial banking system increases. You see, because the initial transaction was done by a financial institution and not what they call a non-bank entity, right? And I know it gets a little complicated there, but you've just got to look at it as two different balance sheets. You've got the balance sheet of the commercial banking system. Those are the deposits of entities and average people or ordinary people. And then you've got the liabilities of the Fed, which are the assets of the commercial banks. So this is the one we're worried about. This is what's going to create inflation or deflation. It's going to be the commercial banking system, the deposits, because those are the people and entities that are out there buying the goods and services that could go up or down in price. Okay, so if buying a Treasury at auction reduces this side, the commercial banking, the deposits in the commercial banking system, then it's going to be a wash, because the Treasury takes the deposits out and then puts the deposits right back in when they spend. But if the Treasury, if them, by issuing the debt that comes from the Fed's liabilities, meaning it was purchased by a banking entity, then the initial transaction doesn't decrease right here the amount of deposits in the commercial banking system like it did if the Treasury was purchased by a non-bank entity. You see, so that initial transaction doesn't decrease the amount; they're still the same. So when when the Treasury spends the money back into existence, then it increases the commercial bank deposits on net balance. So you see where it gets nuanced there is you have to start by asking the question, who's doing the buying in the first place? And then you've got to see how quantitative easing is working, right? So is the Fed buying those treasuries from Joe Blow or from the average Joe, from an entity in the commercial banking system, or are they buying it from the bank themselves? Because one's going to affect broad money, one's going to affect base money. You see? So again, I know this is, and I can hear myself talking, and I'm not doing a very good job explaining it. But just check out that video that I did the other day, the whiteboard video on this topic. I think it was the last whiteboard video I did, and I really laid it out in great detail. And I think I did a much better job explaining it on that video than I just did here. All right. Cool. Well, guys, I want to encourage everyone to check out Rebel Capitalist Pro. We've got an awesome offer, $1 to try it out for a week. That is right. And it's got the research from Lynn Alden, Chris McIntosh, an online member forum. We do live Q&As in there all the time. In fact, I'm going to be doing one this Tuesday night with Miss Lynn Alden herself. And I'm going to be doing a member Q&A in about 1 hour. So check that out. It's at georgegammon.com/pro. And I want to thank everyone for staying here until the end. We had a new time today, so I'm going to go down to the bottom and do some shout outs here. We've got Eric, we've got Jim, Atlas. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. Tony, 8-Bit Madness. Who else? Smeagol. I'm never going to be able to pronounce that. Smeagol, maybe. Sorry, I'm butchering your name. Simon, Andy, Joseph, Tony. Hey, there's Gene. Gene, what's up, buddy? Mice, Showtime, Horatio, Mondalarian, Fanboy, Joseph, Andy, Tony, Will, Daniel, AG, Silver, Mice, ETF, Caleb. There's Arthur, J Hike, Will Drake, Joseph, Showtime, 17, Tony Suave. Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks for sticking with me, and I'll see you on the next video.